Alright, today I'm gonna redo my Mythic guide video. Obviously now it's gonna include Ravnica Allegiance, and I'm also gonna boost the audio in post to make sure that it is loud enough. Now before we get started, as always, this is more aimed towards new players who don't always follow the top 8s, the high level competitive, so just to give them an idea of what is actually, a good card and cards they can safely craft from cards that might not be that bad, but if they're looking to be more competitive, are cards they want to avoid. Oh, and as always, I'm gonna try to go as fast as I can, but it's probably still gonna be a really long video. Anyway, let's get going, and I'm gonna do this in color order, otherwise I would go insane. So let's start with History of Benalia. If you want to play mono white, or now it's mono white with a splash of blue, yes, you need History of Benalia. It's always gonna be a good card until rotation, and you're gonna need 4 copies. Let's move on to the first Mythic Angel. Now this one, not so much, it's not very good. It is way too hard to get it to work, and you want to play more powerful things at turn 3. That is something I should say right now. Remember, a card might look good, but you need to think, what else could I play for the same mana cost? For example, I could play a Angel that is a 3/3 that can be answered by a Lightning Strike, or I could play a History of Benalia for the same mana cost that is much harder to deal with. Therefore, I cannot recommend the Angel, but that is something to think about as we go through these cards, and that is like how you should evaluate cards to see if they are good or not. They might seem good, then you realize there's something much better for same mana. Let's move on to the first version of Ajani. This one is really good. You usually see him as a 2-off in mono white, or well, now it is white with a splash of blue. But the card is really good, and you can safely craft 1 to 2. You probably want 2, you never really want more than 3. I have never seen a list with more than 3 in a high setting. So let's move on to something you can skip, and that is the second version of Ajani. Way more expensive and doesn't really do the same thing. Like, it's just a weaker version of Ajani. You will find that many Planeswalker have one good version, then they have one version that looks like, who came up with this? Did they just tell someone to make a Planeswalker? It's a bit odd, but usually one of the versions are really good, while the other one is like, well, in limited play, sure, in constructed, you will never really use this. Let's move on. Now, Angel of Grace is interesting. At release, I said this would probably see as a one-off in certain control decks or as a sideboard card. We did see it as a 4-off in a tournament. I can't remember which one, but it placed in the top 8. That was kind of interesting, but since then we haven't seen a single Angel of Grace make it anywhere. So I don't know. The card is not bad. You can probably own one as a sideboard card in control, but having a playset is probably overkill for now. If you're wondering why I have 4, I managed to actually open 4. Or I crafted 1 because I thought I could have it in my control deck in the sideboard, then I opened 3 more in 3 weeks. So yay, let's move on. To Divine Visitation. This card is kinda interesting, but it is kinda slowish. You can probably have a single copy in your collection, but it's not a card that you need to craft to make any high tier deck. But it's not a terrible card, just a bit slowish, and that's all about that. Let's move on to a card that you should own, with that I don't own, which is Lyra Dawnbringer. Now, Lyra Dawnbringer is, well, it's an amazing card. It should never have been printed. It's the Baneslayer of the format. There's nothing wrong with her. If you're gonna craft her, you want 2 copies, but probably not more. 2 copies of Lyra seems to be the go-to if you're gonna use the color, that is. I mean, the card is never gonna be bad, but you don't want a playset of it. That would be a bit strange. Especially if you are in a control deck, and now when we have the new Wrath card in the format, it's very hard to get creatures to stick, and, well, you don't want to Wrath your own Lyra Dawnbringer, so you don't want more than 2. Let's move on to a Tyrant, or a Dinosaur. In Standard, no, you never, or in Constructed, you never want to play this card really. I guess if you're a die-hard Dino fan and just want to make a fun Dino deck, you could craft him, but for Standard play or for Constructed play, I would never recommend him. Let's move on to another card that you can safely skip, and that is the Axis of Mortality. Again, this is a fun card, and let's leave it at that. So let's move on to the Walking Sun Avatar. Again, if you want to make a Dino Tribe deck, sure, go ahead and own this card. Otherwise, I would never recommend it. Like, you're paying 8 mana for an effect, and it's very questionable, probably even in Dino decks. But let's move on. It's a card that you can safely skip. So we're now done with white, and we're going to move over to blue. First, we have the Time Stream Navigator. This is another card that is kind of it hasn't seen play like in... I can't remember the last time I saw a Navigator like anywhere. The card is not very good. It is a card you can safely skip, and I'm gonna do so in order to save time. Because if I went through every single card like in incredible detail, we would be here for like 6 hours. Anyway, let's move on to Jace the Cunning Castaway. This was ironically the first Mythic card I opened in MTG Arena. Sadly, the card is not very good. It has seen play once in a mono blue. Someone was trying it out and got pretty far in a tournament, but apart from that, I have never seen the card played. And now with the new blue-white, what is it called? Dovin. There's no reason to own this card ever. It's a card you can safely skip, and it's a card you'll be probably a bit depressed seeing. Let's move on to the Narumeh Wizard thingy. This is another card you can safely skip. It's not very good. Sure, if you want to make some funny tribe deck with wizards, yeah, you can probably own a couple, but other than that, the card is just too expensive. I wouldn't recommend actually crafting it at all. Obviously, it's not a tier 1 card. Let's move on to a card that is, well, this one you can also safely skip. This is pretty much what the Mythic card should have been. It's a fun card, it's not very powerful, and let's leave it at that. You could probably have this in Limited, but even then, it's kinda weak. The fact that it doesn't have flying or anything makes it really questionable as a card. Let's move on to a card that I love, that sadly hasn't gotten the attention that it needs, and that is Tezzeret, the Artificer Master thingy. Now personally, I love running this card. I run it in some version of Control. I run it in my Rat deck, which is one of my favorite deck. And overall, I think this card is extremely underrated. But considering Teferi is still a thing, I understand why. I mainly run this when I don't run any kind of white, so I can't play Teferi. What makes the Tezzeret really good is his first ability. You can make a blocker every single turn, and in theory can hold someone off, assuming they don't have trample or unblockable forever with a Tezzeret. I've done that quite a few times, where I held off something really big that would have ruined the game for me, but the toppler kept just coming and managed to stall the game until I could take it over. The card is really good, but because it's not currently tier 1 play, I can't recommend you owning it or crafting it. But the card is much better than people give it credit for. This is probably the only Mythic card that I'm gonna disagree with the meta about, because I think this card is really good. I've seen it work multiple times against decks that are meta, so I'm not gonna downplay the card, but it's not the card that you need to own. Let's move on to a card that I sadly have 3 copies of, and that is the Dream Eater. Now sadly, this Sphinx is a bit slow. The effect is really nice, but for 6 mana, there's so many better things you could do, so this is a card you can safely skip. Now it is kind of fun to play around with in a Sphinx deck or in some kind of flash deck, but again, it's not a card that you need to own to make a proper tier 1 deck. Let's move on to another card you can safely skip, and that is Jace the Ingenious Mind Mage. I mean, 6 mana, you can draw a card or untap all your creatures. Hooray! Let's move on to the second version of Tezzeret. My English went there. Let's move on to the second version of Tezzeret. Now this one is also kinda questionable. It is 1 more mana than the first version of Tezzeret, and 6 mana you draw a card, or you can make an artifact become a 5/5 creature in addition to other creature types. It is way too expensive for what it does, unlike the first Tezzeret that actually has quite a bit of use. Let's move on to the card that everyone, well, hated. Now, it is actually banned. I almost felt like buying a pack just to celebrate, just to give them some money, because they actually banned Nexus of Fate, but the fact that they printed it to begin with was disgusting. Anyway, since it is banned and this is MTG Arena, you can't really use the card, so why would you craft it? If you weren't here, if you were watching this in the future and you weren't here during the Nexus of Fate craze, then count yourself lucky. It was the most disgusting thing ever, especially in MTG Arena, because in MTG Arena you could stall like forever with Nexus of Fate. If you did it on the online client, you would lose because your time would run out, and if you did it in a tournament, you would be disqualified because you were basically playing without a win condition, just holding up the time. That is something you're not allowed to do. But in Arena you could do nasty things with this thing, but it is banned, so yay. Let's move on. I just wanted to really... let's just move on to Overflowing Insight. 7 mana to draw 7 cards. Obviously you can skip this card, and it is a sorcery, so you can't even do it at the end of your opponent's turn. Let's move on to another card you can skip, that is the Omniscience thingy. 10 mana, really? It is a fun card, maybe you can use it in EDH, but we don't have that in Arena, so if you open this card, you'll probably be quite disappointed. A card that you might not be as disappointed with is gonna be Liliana Untouched by Death. This card is okayish, it is currently not seeing tier 1 play, but it is not a terrible card, and you can actually kinda use it in meme decks and for fun. Obviously, if you are a competitive player that only care about competitive play, then this is a card you can actually skip. But otherwise, you will not be... You won't have an omniscience moment where you go, well, really? You will be more like, I could do something fun with this. Let's move on to a card that is not terrible, and that is Phyrexian Scripture. However, in the current standard, or in the current format, it is a bit too slow. It did see a bit of play as a sideboard card. When was it? When Dominaria came out. It's not a bad card, but it is, as I said, a bit slow. You could probably own 1 or 2 of this and not be unhappy. You could certainly use this as a sideboard card in best of 3 in the current format, but it's not something that you need to craft to make a tier 1 deck. It's not like a Teferi that you need if you want to play control decks. Let's move on to a card that is really good, and that is Spawn of Mayhem. This card has seen a lot of play in Standard. It is good in Mono Black, it is good in Black Red. The card is just overall a good card. However, if you're gonna own it, you probably do want to full place it. But the card can certainly be recommended to be crafted. Now, Twilight Prophet is kinda interesting. I've seen it as a one-off in some decks, but it's once again, it's one of those cards that you don't need to make a deck. Let's move on to a card you can certainly skip, and that is the Bone Dragon. 5 mana for a 5/4. It has an effect where you exile 7 cards to get him back. I mean, you could play this, or you could play Arc-like Phoenix. Again, if you open this card, you would probably be quite sad. This is one of those, well, limited, sure, go ahead and pick it up, but in constructed play, you would never see this card played ever. If this card ever see play, then, well, I don't know, that would be a day to remember. Let's move on to another card that you can safely skip, and that is the Direfleet Ravager. Now, the card at first looks kind of okayish, but then you realize if you're playing something aggressive, the enemy will probably already be at such a low health that your effect doesn't really matter, and of course, you can't really play him in like a slower deck because it would make no sense. I don't know, it's cards like these are like, they are what Mythic should have been, but they are not what they are. Let's leave it at that and move over to Doom Whisperer. Yeah, my voice really went there. Doom Whisperer at release saw a lot of play. It has since then faded. It rarely sees It rarely sees play anymore, however the card is not bad, but in the current format it might be a bit too slow. It is weak, of course. If you were to play against Burn, you'll probably die if you try to use the effect, and if you play it against Control, well, currently Control decks have so many removals and so many 1-for-1s that you would basically pay 5 mana and 2 life to scry or to survey twice. But the card is not bad, but I can't recommend you crafting it, but you won't be unhappy opening it. It has seen a little bit of comeback, but again, it's not a required card such as Teferi. Let's move over to Liliana the Necromancer, and let's move on. This card is terrible. 5 mana to deal 2 damage. Yay. Or you can return a creature card from your graveyard. Or you could just play Find Finality. I mean, again, this is another Planeswalker where you go, no. Let's move on. To Demlord Belsenlock, whatever. This is another card you can safely skip. It is one of those fun cards, but if you're looking for tier 1 decks, this is a card you're never gonna include. Now the Haunt of Hightower is interesting. If you look at the price of this card, you would think it would see a lot of play. However, in Standard, I've yet to see a deck include this card. Or well, in Standard, in Constructed. The card is just too slow, and with 3 life, it dies to pretty much anything from red. And of course, any control deck will just kill it outright with 20 removals they have or something like that. Again, this is a card that has a high price in the physical game, but I can't really figure out why. It might have something to do with Legacy or Modern, I'm not quite sure, but since I'm currently not invested in either of those formats, I don't really know why the price is still really high on this card. But I wouldn't recommend you crafting it unless you want to do something fun. Let's move on to a card that you can safely skip, and that is Raska the Scheming Gorgon. Now, just as with the other legendary mythics, legendary planeswalkers, that I've gone over, this one, it's too expensive for what it does. 6 mana to give your creature +1 until the end of the turn, or destroy a target creature. Why would you pay 6 mana for it? Especially 6 mana, just consider what else you could actually cast. Let's move on to another card that you can safely skip, and that is the Boneyard Parlay. This card, well, it is a fun card. Let's leave it at that. It is obviously not constructed playable. Now, Sarkhan the Fireblood it's not a tier 1 card. It's never gonna see tier 1 play probably. I'm gonna leave that probably because you never know, but as of this moment, this is a card that you can probably own to have some fun with, but you can't make a competitive tier 1 deck with it. Let's move on to a card that you definitely can make tier 1 decks with, or even modern decks with, and that is the Arc-like Phoenix. This card is amazing, should probably never have been printed, and what more is there to say about it? You can do a lot of fun things with this. Fun for you, not fun for your opponent. And well, it is the Arc-like Phoenix. It's a staple card in Arc-like Phoenix decks. However, it is not included in Drake decks for the most of it. Currently, Drake's decks are running 12 Drakes, so there's no really room for the Arc-like Phoenix. However, the card is not bad. And since they did announce, I can't remember when, but they did announce that MTG Arena was gonna get some kind of not modern, but a format that includes the current card and moving forward. So Arc-like Phoenix is a card. It's a fun card. You can craft it. You can get to high ranking with it if you make an Arc-like Phoenix deck, but Drake decks are cheaper to make. I don't know how to describe it. You won't be unhappy owning this card, unless you're like me and opened 6 of these before we had the 5th card protection. Then you could probably be a bit unhappy. But I'm getting off topic. Let's move on to Rekindling Phoenix. Now this card is really good, and you will either see this as a 2-off or you see this as a 4-off in the new black-red mid-range deck. The card is really good, really hard to deal with. But if you're gonna craft it, you probably do want 4 to, at the very least you want 2, but probably if you're gonna play black and red, you are gonna need a full playset of rekindling phoenixes. Just so you are aware of that fact. Let's move on to a card that you can skip, and that is the Rowdy Crew. This card is just meh. If you read the text, you will realize just how meh this card is. I do believe this is a mythic card you do start with when you start a new account in MTG Arena. Let's move on to another card that you can safely skip, and that is the Bladewing. Now sadly, 4 mana, remember what I said in the beginning of the video? Remember what else you could play for 4 mana, and then you realize why cards like these will never see standard play unless this become like the most powerful card in the format. Then you would see play, but otherwise cards like these are cards you can safely skip. If you want to make a fun Dragon Tribe deck, sure. Otherwise, let's just move on to another card that you can safely skip, and that is the first version of J.R. Balrog. I think this is the only version, or is there another one? I can't remember. Anyway, this card is, as I said previously, too expensive for what it does and is too slow. Let's move on, because otherwise this video would be, well, a few hours. And we're gonna move over to the Hellkite. Now, the Hellkite is really good. It has not seen tournament success so far, but it has seen online success, and it has gotten people to the Mythic rank in MTG Arena. So it is a card that you can craft, it is a good card, however it's currently not seen competitive play, it hasn't seen successful competitive play in the highest rankings. I just want to put it like that, just so you see the difference between, there's always a difference between online and physical. Decks that usually works on MTG online tends to be not as good as decks that works in the tournaments that are played with physical cards. The same can be said about MTG Arena. They are pretty much the same thing, online and Arena. Let's move on, let's not get into the whole debate about that, but Hellkite is a card you can safely own, however you probably are gonna need a playset. Let's move on to a Chandra, and as always, too expensive for what it does, and is too slow. Let's move on to the second version of Sarkhan the Dragon Soul. Again, as I keep saying, and I'm gonna keep saying, too slow for what it does and costs too much. Let's move on to a card that has seen a lot of standard play, however is currently not seeing that much standard play, and that is the Star of Extinction. I've seen a few banned lists, or not banned list, Nexus list run this card. However, since Nexus is now banned, this is a card you can probably skip. Control decks used to run this card back before Ravnica Allegiance, because before that, control decks ran red, blue, and white. We didn't have the new Wrath card that is white and black. So in order to get some more board clearance and get around certain troublesome cards, Star of Extinction was a card that control players did include in the sideboard, but now that we have the new Wrath for 4 mana, there's no reason to run Star of Extinction anymore. Anyway, let's move on to Apex of Power. It's a fun meme card, that's all I'm gonna say about it, and let's move on. I should probably put on my timer because I do have pasta cooking upstairs. This could be interesting. Anyway, let's move on to Nullhide Ferox. The card has seen play in Standard, it has seen play in tournaments. Currently, it's not a card that fits anywhere, and it is a bit too... It's not slow, but it's too situational. However, we do see a lot of Thought Erasure becoming a standard card now, especially in control decks, that maybe this could see a resurgence, but it is a card you can safely skip from crafting, but I don't think you'll be unhappy owning it. You can certainly do some fun things on, if you're playing like casual queue or just playing some low ranks, you can certainly use this card. It's by no means bad, but it's not a Hellkite level. it is more situational. A card that is, well, very situational is Scapeshift. You can do this, you can use this card in some combo decks, but that's about it. Otherwise, stay away from this card. Alright, so we're finally going to come to a card that is kinda up and coming. As I said on release date, we would probably see the Ooze as a one-off in tournament decks, and we did see last week one of the Sultai decks running a single copy of the Ooze in the main board. Now the card is not bad, you probably don't want a playset, but again, if you're gonna play Sultai, you could include this into your deck and do well. However, as I said before, it's not a card that you need in order to run a successful Sultai deck, but the card is not bad, and obviously the card is really fun, so if you want to craft this, go ahead. But it's not currently the best of the best, but it's not bad. It's hard to describe it. Now, a card I can certainly recommend and that you should own if you play Sultai or, well, anything green really, is Vivian Reed, unless you're playing some weird control or Nexus. Well, Nexus is banned now. Anyway, let's move on. Vivian Reed, a very good card. It's gonna see play until it rotates. Again, it does everything that you want it to do. You get creatures, you can destroy flyings, you can destroy drakes, you can destroy enchantments, which are quite important, and you can destroy artifacts. The card is just amazing. Now, if you're gonna craft it, you are gonna need at the very least 2 copies. Probably a third wouldn't be bad, but usually you see the third in the sideboard, although some Sultai lists I have seen do run 3 in the main board. But the card, I can recommend the card, it's not bad. Now, a card that is questionable now is the Carnage Tyrant. Before Sultai was a thing, and when Sultai was Golgaria, Carnage Tyrant was a staple. You saw him everywhere. However, with Ravnica Allegiances being released, you have seen Carnage Tyrant fade out of the Sultai decks, or coming into the sideboard, or going to the sideboard. The card is not bad, but it's not as powerful as it once was. Some of the reasons are we now have the new Wrath card at 4 mana, which means it's much easier to deal with the Tyrant, and also we do have the Hydroid Krasis, which I'm going to talk about later, that is, well, it's an amazing card. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, you can still safely craft Carnage Tyrant, it's still a good card. However, you don't need... Previously, you needed 3 to 4 in pretty much every Golgaria deck. Now you can probably get away with 2, and you probably don't even need them in the main board. It's a card that is good, but it is slowly being replaced. Now, a card that is never gonna see play and never gonna be good is the Avatar Elemental Legendary Creature thingy. Again, way too slow for what it does. Let's move on to the second version of Vivian Reed. Just as I said previously, too slow, too expensive. I don't see why you would ever craft this. Maybe if you want to have a bit of fun, but if you are competitive in any sense of the word, you can safely stay away from Vivian the Arc Bow. The same can be said about Polyraptor. Now, you can do some fun things with Polyraptor, don't get me wrong, but it's not a tier 1 deck, and it's never gonna fit in a tier 1 deck, and that's all I'm gonna say about it. I'm trying to save time here. So in order to save time, I'm also gonna skip the Great Worm. It looks good at first, then you realize it has no real protection, and it can be killed by pretty much everything, so again, even if this costed like 3 mana, I would never recommend it. Okay, that might be a bit of a stretch. Actually, I don't know. The card is just not very good. Now, a card that is interesting is the Dovin. This has seen tournament play. It has seen mainboard play. It has seen sideboard play. It is currently being explored. However, I'm not gonna say the card is required to make a tier 1 deck, but the card could be in the upcoming month. People are still experimenting with him. The thing is, when Dovin works, it works really well. But when it doesn't work, it becomes a liability. It is one of those cards that allows you to win more, but if you are behind, it usually ends up being a dead card in your hand, but I'm not gonna write it off as a bad card. The future is gonna have to tell if this is gonna be a staple, especially once rotation occurs and we're gonna get rid of cards such as these. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, the most rage-inducing planeswalker ever printed, and I stand by those words. Should never have been printed, should have probably gotten someone fired. This card is, well, it is Cancer Incarnation. This card is, well, I'm not gonna rant about it, but why was it ever printed? Obviously, if you're gonna play Control, you are gonna need 3 copies, although currently we're actually seeing as many as 4 copies. Now bear in mind, this is one of those cards that you need to make Control decks. You need this card to actually make the deck work. Unlike things like Dovin or, let's see, where are you? Let's see, or like the Ooze in Sultai, those you don't need. Teferi you do need if you make Control decks, and you can't get around it. Anyway, let's move on before I get into a huge Teferi rant. I can feel the rant coming. To a card that you can safely skip and I don't have to rant about, and that is the Lawbringer. Now, I have seen this card work in just a few quick matches, but it's certainly not a card that you need to care too much about, but it is a bit of fun. So, let's move over to another card you can safely skip, and this is Doin, the Architect of Law. Just as with other copies of Planeswalkers or the second copy, this one is like, where did all the design go? Like, all the good design went into this. And you are left with 6 mana to draw a card and get 2 life. Never craft this card unless you are... I don't see a situation where you would craft this card. Just as with the second version of Teferi, again, did all the design go into the first version? And we're left with this husk of a Planeswalker. 6 mana, untap up to 1 target artifact or creature. I don't know what to say. Like, you made Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, and then you made this. I don't... As much as you want to rant and tell people that Teferi should never been printed, it is at least interesting in the sense how it was made. This is not interesting. And let's move on, because I do realize my past is about to boil. 2 Emergency Power. This is a card you can safely skip, it's way too expensive, and the thing you need to understand if you are new to Control decks is, by the time you can cast cards like these, you are probably already won. You have probably established a board and have card control. Or the board control, excuse me. Anyway, let's move on to Kaya the Orzhov Usurper. This is probably the second card where I'm gonna say this is really underrated. The card is not bad, it does a lot of interesting things. You could certainly see this in the sideboard, especially after rotation, but right now this is not a card that is being played, but I think it has potential. But again, I wouldn't recommend you to craft it, but I don't think you will be unhappy owning this, especially in the upcoming month. A card you might be a bit miffed about actually owning is the Eldar the Dusku Rose. Way too expensive. It's a 1/1 for 4 mana and it dies to anything. Like, this is, if you're a vampire player, sure, you might like this card. For the rest of us, cards like these are gonna be, huh? And we're just gonna move on to a card that I did rate very badly in the preview or in the first review of the Mythics, where I just went over the Ravnica Mythics, and that is the Serpent of Scale. Now, in my defense, when I reviewed it, I didn't actually notice the Afterlife 2. I was tired, but that's not really an excuse. The card has seen play, the card is good, the card is tier 1 viable. It is that Afterlife 2 that makes it really, really good, because, you know, I said in my first video about it that it would just die to a bolt, but that was when I didn't realize it had Afterlife. Now when I do realize it and I've seen it in play, yes, the card is actually good. However, if you're gonna own it, you are gonna need a playset and you can't really get around that. But the card is good and certainly worth a craft or crafting. A card that is not really worth crafting is the Butcher of Magan thingy. Expensive, pay 7 life to destroy target non-land permanent. I mean, and during your turn. I'm not sure what to say about it, just don't craft it. A card, however, that you could craft is the Multifarius, Lasav, whatever. This card was at first, before Ravnica Allegiance, seen as a meme card or as a fun card. However, recently it has seen play in good decks and in high tier play. So the card is being explored with a new format or with the new cards from Allegiances. It could turn out that the card doesn't really fit, but it could also turn out that the card is really good. I can't recommend you to craft it right now, but it is not a card that you will be unhappy owning. Like, it is not a Butcher that if you open this or you get this as a reward, you're gonna be, oh. With this, you can be content. Now, this is probably gonna be the third card that I'm gonna disagree with the meta about, and that is the Betrayal Memoric thingy. This card is actually really good. However, it's very situational, but it can swing games. I could see this as a sideboard card in the upcoming months. But again, this is not the card that is gonna make a deck. This is a card that's gonna be a sideboard card if it becomes more popular. But that's about it. It's not a card that you need to worry about right now. Now, a card you're never gonna have to worry about is the Weatherlight Captain. I'm not gonna go over it. Why would you ever own this? It is that theory of what else could you play for 4 mana? And then you realize, yeah, the card is not very good. Now, a card that has in play but is currently out of favor is Ral. It saw a lot of play before Allegiances. Or not, it didn't see that many tournament decks, but it did see a few. It was a deck that was played in Drakes, but now when the Drake deck has 12 Drakes, this card is pretty much out, and currently I don't see it being played anymore. But card is not bad, you can still use it, but it's not the card that you need to own to make a deck. A card, however, that is really bad is the Ral Caller of Storms. Just as with the other cards, or the other second version of the Planeswalkers, why would you ever own this? 6 mana, you can draw a card. Hang on, haven't we seen that quite a lot on all of these cards, or all of these Planeswalkers that are questionable? Aren't they all like, draw a card and that's about it? Conspiracy theory? I don't know. Let's move on, because I really want to eat my food and I don't want to burn my pasta. 2000 Year Storm. Please don't own this card. Please don't be one of those jerks that plays combo 1000 Year Storm. It's really unfun to play against. Obviously not a tier 1 deck, but you can make a combo deck with 1000 Year Storm, and it is quite disgusting in a best of 1 environment. But outside of that, it's never going to be a tier 1 deck, and if you craft this, you probably like inflicting rage upon your opponents. Ugh, this card is disgusting, but it's not the card that's gonna break the meta, and let's leave it at that. It's not the Nexus of Fate. So let's move over to the Flame Chained, and let's move to the next page, because this is just like the other Planeswalkers that I kinda skip. It is just too expensive for what it does. 5 mana, and you can have your opponent discard a card and lose 2 life. And that's about it. Alright, so we're coming to a close. Well, there are a few more pages, but the remaining pages are going to be kind of quick, because there are actually not that many interesting cards here. First, we have the second version of the Minotaur. Again, too slow for what it does. We have the Rakdos Shadowstopper. Again, when you read the text, you realize this is just either a limited card or just a fun card, obviously not a constructed card. The same can be said for Captive Audience. Way too expensive. 7 mana for this effect. If this card was cheaper, sure, I could see it playable. But at a 7 mana cost, no. Now, a card that you are gonna wanna craft probably is Raska the Gugarian Queen. This card is amazing. Now, she is falling kind of to favor at the moment. She saw a lot more play where before Allegiances. Now with Sultai stretching for colors, she is fading out. She's still good though, and well, basically she and Vivian Reed swapped plays. Before, Raska was the main card and Vivian Reed was the sideboard card. Now Raska is actually being pushed out of the deck, but the card is still good. Anyway, let's move on to a card that you safely can skip, and that is the Underrealm Lich. The card is, well, it's an interesting card, it is an interesting idea, it is just too slow, and with 3 mana, or 3 life, excuse me, it can easily be dealt with in any number of ways. It can't even block an Adonte Vanguard. That is always the test, can it block an Adonte Vanguard, and should it? In this case, no. So, let's move to the second version of Raska. Now, this version is actually good. Unlike most other second versions, this one is playable. It has actually seen a lot of play, usually as a one-off. The reason why it saw so much play and still seeing a bit of play is the second ability, is the fact that she can kill enchantments, which is very important in the current format, especially with things like Summit. We have Legion's Landing still being a thing, Search for Iskanta still being a thing. Luckily those things are gonna rotate in the coming months. Anyway, let's move to the third copy of Raska, and this one is the one you can skip. 7 mana to give +1/+1, and they get Menace to the end of the turn. Just no. Let's move over to a card that is currently not seeing tournament play, but could, and this is the Domir Chaos Bringer. Now when you read this card, you realize it is really good. However, currently there are so many good decks that this card has not had a chance to shine yet, but this is a card that is probably gonna see play in the future, and is definitely gonna see play after the rotation happens. The card is just good, and well, it has seen play in decks that has reached Mythic, and it has seen Magic Online play. It just hasn't seen top 8 plays. But the card is not, I don't think the card is being held back by itself. It's more held back by the fact that people like to play what is already working. But this is a card that certainly works. So it could become a really important card, or it probably will become a really important card. In any case, you will not be unhappy owning this. The second version though, you would be quite unhappy owning. Now this, just like the second or third versions of Planeswalkers, is just terrible. 6 mana to give a creature haste and +1/+1. I mean, why would you? A card that is currently being explored is the Ravnica Worm. This card is actually really good. It can go after drakes. It can go after many important things. And more importantly, it can also destroy land with activated abilities. However, it's not too important right now, but it could become important. But the card is not bad, but it is a card you don't need to make a deck work, but you will not be unhappy opening it. A card that you will be unhappy opening is Chance for Glory, unless you're going with some meme deck. Again, it's just a, well, it's a meme card, and that's about it. Now, a card that I was harsh on before was Aurelia, Example of Justice. I still don't really like the card, I still don't feel like it fits, and currently it's completely out of favor. I haven't seen a single Aurelia in forever, not since Allegiance became a thing. I mean, the card is not, it's not bad, but it's one of those cards, if she loses her friends so she can no longer mentor, the card just becomes questionable, and drakes can quite easily either block her or fly into her and actually trade. The card is just, it's not a bad card, you can still probably own it and not be unhappy, it's just currently not seeing that much play anymore. A card that you can safely skip like from now to the end of time is the Warrior Poet. This card, again, slow, doesn't do many great things. Same with the second version, slow doesn't do really anything. And the same can be said about the third version, which is the green-white one. Again, doesn't really do what you really want it to do. Like, no. Now, a card that is definitely still in the meta and is probably not gonna see, or probably not gonna leave the meta for a long time, is the Distorted Dryad thingy. This card is always going to be good, has a really good effect, and still sees play in token decks. Now, if you're going to play tokens, sadly, you are going to need at least 3 copies of this card. It is that good and that important. But the card, again, if you want to play tokens, this is a card you need. But if you don't want to play tokens, this is a card you can skip, but the card is not bad. Same can be said about March of the Multitude. Now, previously to Ravnica Allegiance, you needed 4 March of the Multitude, 4 History of Benalia, and 3 copies of the Dryad. Currently, I'm seeing March of the Multitude fading from the token deck. However, it still is an important card, and it's a card you're still gonna need for some time. However, you no longer need all 4 copies, but it's still a really expensive deck when it comes to Mythic wildcards. Now, a card that you only need if you're gonna play Merfolk is the Tyrant of Ora, Saka, whatever, is the Tyrant Merfolk. Obviously, if you play Merfolk, you need this, otherwise you don't need it. And let's leave it at that. It's a really good card. Well, you might need 2 to 3 copies. That's all I'm gonna say about the card. And obviously, if you play Merfolk. Now, a card that looked so interesting is the Prime Speaker. When it was previewed, it looked so interesting. It is a Birthing Pod on leg, but it is slower than Birthing Pod, and it is weaker than Birthing Pod, so I can't recommend crafting this. It could find a use eventually, but right now it's not working. Most people didn't think it would work. I didn't think it would work, but I gave it a chance. But it hasn't happened yet. If you guys want to see a fun deck, go and look at old videos about Birthing Pod decks from several years ago. It was a really fun deck. Sadly, this is not the same level as Birthing Pod was. And I can hear my voice is starting to go. So let's finish this really quickly. With the Voice of Thunder, even for a Merfolk player, this is never gonna see play. Like 7 mana, you're asking a Merfolk player to cast something for 7 mana. Don't be ridiculous. Alright, we're finally here. Hydroid Krasis. Every MTG Arena player should own a playset of this. This is the most amazing card printed in forever. What makes it so strong is its text. When you cast this spell, this means that when you cast this, the trigger effect after happens, which means you cannot counter it. You cannot just use a cancel or a counter spell to counter the draining or gaining life and drawing cards. You need something that counter an activated trigger. The card is amazing. I cannot give it enough praise. Well, the only thing I can say that is bad about this card is the fact that I still have not found a good way to draw it. I keep trying to draw it, but I'm never happy with it. That's why I've not released a drawing of it quite yet. But one day I will release an amazing drawing of it. But right now I'm still struggling with it. But that's the only thing that's holding this card back from being one of the most amazing cards of all eternity. I mean, craft this card now. Craft 4 copies. You will never be disappointed if you own this card. It's that good. Any deck that can run these colors want to run it. Any deck that can't run these colors wish they could. It is that amazing. And the price tag is kind of reflecting that. Now, a card that you shouldn't own unless you hate people is the Mutable one. This is, well, you can see this in some version of control decks as a one-off, as usually their only creature. And, well, it is the Mutable. You don't need it. Unlike Teferi, you don't need it to play control decks, but the card is good. But it's only good for control decks. So, but, I mean, if you get one from a daily win or something, or daily reward card, sure, but you don't need to craft this card. Please don't craft it. A card that you're never gonna want to craft really is the Beckett Brass. If you are a pirate player and love pirates, sure. Otherwise, you can safely skip it. Alright, so we're finally coming towards the end. My voice is burning away. I love it. Anyway, let's finish this off. First, we have Nicholas Bolas. The card is still good. However, it doesn't see tier 1 meta deck play. but you can certainly run a Nicholas Bollas deck and do well on MTG Arena, and that is currently what this video is about. So I can recommend crafting the card if you want to make a Nicholas Bollas deck. However, how do I put this? Don't expect it to be a mono blue. Don't expect to just rolling over people. You need a lot of thought or a lot of thinking when you play a Nicholas Bollas deck. But the card it's never gonna be a bad card really. It's in standard. But I don't know. If you want to play a Nicholas Bollas deck, you obviously need 4 copies of this. Otherwise, you don't really need to care about this card too much. Now, a card that you're never gonna care about is the Dire. Too expensive for what it does. And it doesn't even have haste. Same can be said about Paul Darigas. It has haste, but so expensive. And exile effect, I mean, sure he comes back, but it takes forever. Sadly, Darigas is one of those cards that I might never see play, really. I was gonna say maybe on rotation, but he's gonna rotate with the rotation. So yeah, sadly, Darigas is once again gonna have to wait a few more years until he might get a playable copy. The same can be said about the Runer. Again, at first it looks good, but you know, if you're playing as a control player, well, here is a Wrath, here's a Day of Judgment, and goodbye Elder Dragon. Now, Sun Avatar you can make meme decks with and Dine decks with, but otherwise you can safely stay away from this card. The same can be said about the Primal Calamity. It's a fun card to play with, no doubt, but you don't need it for a tier 1 deck. Now, the Strategist is a card I am interested in, however, it's not really working anywhere, but I don't know, it's an interesting card, but it is a card you can skip. Now, the Gravetide can do some really fun stuff. You can make fun decks with this, they can actually work to a certain degree, but again, it's never gonna be a tier 1 deck, but if you want a bit of fun, the Gravetide can never go wrong. A card that at release people were interested in the card, Mox Amber. They were speculating about the card, but it hasn't really proved itself. It is just, I mean, the fact that you need legendary planeswalker creature is what holding it back, but I understand why it is so weak compared to all the older Mox cards and, you know, artifact cards. It is just, I don't know. Since most people here don't know about Legacy and other formats, I'm not gonna go into it. But the card is probably never gonna see standard play, so we don't have to worry about it. Now, Sori's Gateway is a good card actually. You could own this card like a couple of 2, but it's one of those cards that is not required for any deck to work. Now, a card that's never gonna see standard play is Crucible of Worlds. The card is not bad, especially in other formats, and especially if you want to have fun, but in the standard, and the standard we have, this isn't gonna work anywhere, so it's a card you can safely skip. A card that you shouldn't skip, and this is the card that I would recommend like everyone to craft, and that is Karn. For obvious reason, he fits into anything, and he is a really amazing card. Now was it before M10 or M19? Anyway, before one of the recent expansions, Karn saw a lot more play. Now he's a bit more limited, but the card is still amazing. I would always recommend having a few copies of Karns. Obviously, the full playset is probably never going to be required, but the card is never going to be bad in standard. So, let's finish this off with Mr. Weatherlight. If you want to play artifact decks and have a bit of fun, sure. Otherwise, again, this is not required for a tier 1 deck. But I don't know, I have some fond memories with Weatherlight, but yeah, you don't need this card. It's an interesting card. Crew was one of the more fun things that came out of Dominaria. It didn't really make up for Teferi though. Nothing will ever make up for Teferi. I can't do that. I was gonna do funny voice, but yeah, my throat is raw now. So it's time to finish off this video, and it's gonna be the Immortal Sun. Now, the Immortal Sun has seen play, but usually as a one-off and in a sideboard, but it's very rarely seen play, so it is a card that you don't need, but if you open a copy of it, you won't be unhappy about owning it. Or if you play best of ones, you might be unhappy about owning this, but if you play best of threes, this is a card you can always throw in there in case you go like, I don't know what I should include in as my last card in sideboard. I might as well throw in an Immortal Sun. Anyway guys, that is gonna do for this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now, is that my food smelling? Oh, that could be quite awkward. Well, assuming the house doesn't burn down, I will see you guys tomorrow. This has been Project, and yeah, as always, subscribe if you want more and stuff like that. But I gotta go and save my food, and I catch you guys later. Is that actually okay?